This 2021 NBA season was the year that the Utah Jazz was supposed to get over the hump and at least make the Western Conference Finals. I mean, everyone knows that they've been unbeatable for the majority of the season with the league best 52-20 record. They've had the league's highest net rating, they've had 3 All-Stars, and they've got the 6th Man of the Year and the Defensive Player of the Year on the roster, together with a bunch of role players who really did fit well with the team's system. But after going up 2-0 against the Clippers in the second round, they once again had to face elimination. And well, yeah, they were missing Mike Conley for essentially the whole series, but all in all, they were still definitely in prime position to beat this Los Angeles team, considering that the Clippers also missed Kawhi Leonard to injury during the games that mattered the most. But we all saw what happened. The Clippers scored 119 points on 51.2% shooting in game number 5, and 131 points on 51.3% shooting in game number 6, which numbers pretty much explain why the Jazz have been eliminated in the second round of the playoffs for the 3rd time in the past 5 seasons. So basically, this brings us to one question, and that is, did the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert led Utah Jazz core already max out their ceiling? And if that's not the case, what can they actually do to get to the next level moving forward? So what's good, guys? It's Rero Balls here, and today we'll look into the obvious problem that this team has as it's presently constructed and how it can be possibly fixed in the future. And we'll also look into the tough decisions that the front office has got to deal with this offseason. But before we move on, if you happen to enjoy the content that I put out on the channel, you can show your support by hitting that like button, as it definitely helps me reach more people. It only takes a second of your time, but it will be much appreciated. So let's get to it. For a team that pretty much dominated the regular season, the Jazz definitely also had a pretty favorable route in terms of possibly advancing to the conference finals or even the NBA finals. Well, I mean, they didn't have to face a LeBron James-led team, and they didn't even have to deal with Kawhi Leonard towards the home stretch of their second round series. And they were also in the best position possible to force a potential game number 7 at home against the Clippers, as everything went really smooth for them in the first half of game number 6. I mean, Jordan Clarkson dropped 21 points in the second quarter alone, Donovan Mitchell had 22 points by halftime as well, and they were just hitting shot after shot on the way to building a huge 22-point lead at the break. But from that point on, the Clippers just continued to expose Utah's one fatal flaw, which changed the outcome of the game and the series altogether. And that is the fact that the Jazz just can't defend a team who plays 5 shooters on the floor all at the same time, when that same team happens to have players who can easily penetrate to the rim as well. Well, I mean, the Jazz are definitely one of the best defensive teams in the league, as they've ranked 4th in defensive efficiency during the season. And obviously, a lot of that has got to do with Rudy Gobert. I mean, Gobert just won his 3rd DPOY award, and there's definitely no one in the NBA who's better in terms of sealing the paint and blocking shots in the perimeter at the same time than him. Because contrary to what casual fans have been saying, this guy actually moves his feet in space pretty well, and combine that with his 7'9" wingspan, then you've got a big man who constantly alters opponents' shots from anywhere on the floor. But for real, that actually hardly mattered against the Clippers when they've adjusted and played small ball with 5 shooters on the floor, which in turn constantly forced Gobert to extend his defense in the perimeter, which removed the extra layer of protection that he provided in the interior for Utah. So basically, that's been the problem. Gobert can definitely defend both the perimeter and the paint, but when you're expecting him to be successful in defending both simultaneously against a small ball team while also covering for most of his team's lapses, then the results aren't going to be that good, and we saw that against the Clippers. I mean, looking at this clip, you can see how Reggie Jackson made backing down a smaller Mike Conley look very easy. I mean, you can see how Gobert has to help on defense to prevent an easy layup, but when he does, it's already too late for him to recover against a wide open Terrence Mann corner 3. And again, in this possession, you can see Paul George attacking the paint as is picked up by Royce O'Neale, and again, Gobert had to help, but he again didn't close out quick enough to effectively challenge the corner 3. And looking at the Clippers shot chart for the second half of game number 6, yeah, you'll see that it pretty much tells the whole story. LA shot 71% from the field in the second half, and all in all, Utah allowed the Clippers to attempt 27 shots at the rim and a total of 22 corner 3-pointers in that game. And I mean, while Rudy Gobert surely had his share of lapses during the series, I think this is far from being all his fault. Because looking at it, Utah also doesn't have a lot of two-way players who can make life easier for them in terms of defending offensive players like Paul George or even Kawhi Leonard from the point of attack. Well, Royce O'Neale is the closest thing to a perimeter stopper that they have, but let's be real, he's undersized at 6'4" and he's athletically average by NBA standards. And I mean, a healthy Mike Conley could have helped the Jazz overwhelm the Clippers offensively, but I think his lack of size wouldn't have solved the problem problem on the other side of the floor either. So I mean, people can blame Gobert for this playoff exit all they want, but the truth is, this looks more of a structural issue than just the fault of one defensive player. And so if that's the case, then why is Utah's roster built this way to begin with? And to understand that, I think we have to go back a few years. While the Jazz had a different problem back in 2018 and 2019, as the team just didn't have the firepower to keep up with CP3 and James Harden's Rockets as they lost to them in back-to-back seasons in the playoffs. That time, Donovan Mitchell was still a shell of his current self, and guys like Jay Crowder and Ricky Rubio also didn't provide enough floor spacing for him to operate. But overall, you gotta give the Jazz credit for reinventing their team and surrounding Mitchell and Gobert with players who fit with them much better. I mean, they traded for Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley, and they also re-signed Bojan Bogdanovic. And the result of all those moves is the offensive monster which we've known as the 2020 to 2021 Utah Jazz. But I think the problem with the current roster that they've created is that it relies on Rudy Gobert's value in defense a little too much, and how that defense can make up for the rest of the team's lapses. So I mean, if this loss against the Clippers taught the Jazz something, it's that they need to make the roster more flexible to adapt to different situations, and also that it's no coincidence that teams who played small ball like the Warriors, Rockets, and now the Clippers have beat all those Jazz teams with Gobert as its center during the past few seasons. And so as it stands, I think the biggest need for the Jazz this offseason would be another 3-and-D guy who can really defend high-level offensive players from the point of attack more effectively. I mean, that's the obvious middle ground that the front office needs to look at right now, since having that kind of player would significantly lessen the need for Gobert to overcompensate on either end of the floor, which would allow him to maximize his ability to stretch his defense on the perimeter without having to worry too much about giving help on the paint, especially against small ball lineups. But the thing is, it's not that easy to find those types of 3-and-D wings right now, and those guys don't come often even in the trade market. And even this 2021 offseason, I think the best wing player available who could really move the needle for the Jazz on both ends of the floor would be Norman Powell, but they just don't have the cap space to sign a guy like him, as he would most definitely command a significant amount of money. Well, I mean, they can try going after a guy like Kelly Oubre, probably using the team's $5.9 million mid-level exception, since he may come at a cheaper price after shooting only 31% from deep for Golden State last season. But the problem is, the Jazz might even hesitate to use that mid-level exception, especially if the cost of re-signing Mike Conley ends up to be too expensive, since doing so would add a significant amount to the team's luxury tax bill, which is already quite high. So looking at it, before Utah can even make significant moves this offseason, they first need to deal with the Mike Conley situation. Well, I mean, the team is already in luxury tax territory, which is already expected after they've committed a combined $370 million to Mitchell and Gobert's contract extensions. But I mean, the Jazz already knew all along that keeping Mike Conley in the long run wouldn't have been an easy thing to do. And yeah, for sure, Conley just made the All-Star team for the first time in his career, and there's no doubt that he played well the entire season. He was even the team's best player in the Memphis series, as he averaged more than 17 points and more than 8 assists while shooting 55% from 3. But of course, there are the obvious injury concerns that come with him. I mean, just a season ago, he missed multiple games due to a hamstring injury, and a similar injury also caused him to miss 45 games during the 2021 regular season, including the first 5 games against the Clippers in the second round. Well, looking at it, the Miami Heat and the New York Knicks I think are the only teams who have the obvious need for a point guard who also projects to have enough cap space to sign Conley without having to sacrifice any of its team's important rotation pieces. So I think the Jazz are still primed to keep Conley for a fair price, but I mean, looking at it, resigning him to a hypothetical and pretty modest 2-year $40 million deal, for example, would make him the 15th highest paid point guard in the league. And if the Jazz do that, they will have to pay a franchise-high $45 million in luxury tax bills beginning next season. So I mean, yeah, Conley is still a veteran all-star guard who definitely makes the Jazz a much better team, but they still need to be able to figure his situation out pretty well for them to be able to compete and get better without drying up all the team's resources in the long run. But I mean, whether they resign Conley or not, for sure, the Jazz can once again bank on continuity next season, as they'll have a total of 9 players guaranteed to be back under contract. And of course, the continued development of Donovan Mitchell is something that they can definitely look forward to. Well, I mean, Mitchell comes fresh off the second best playoff series of his career next to the Nuggets series in the bubble, wherein he scored 50 points twice. I mean, against the Clippers, he continued to play lights out, dropping 45 points in Game 1, 37 points in Games 2 and 4, and 39 points in Game 6. And the scary thing is, he did that practically playing on one leg, and the pain and discomfort actually showed multiple times during the series. So just imagine what this guy can do when he's 100%. And also, the good news for the Jazz is that Spider's 5-year extension only kicks in at the beginning of next season, which means that they have the time to be able to figure things out. So overall, their recent playoff exit doesn't mean that this Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell-led Jazz core is doomed. But for sure, the Jazz front office has to make a roster upgrade one way or another, and they definitely have to once again reinvent their roster to prevent such a thing from happening in the near future. So what do you guys think is next for the Utah Jazz? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you enjoy content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel as well. Again, this is Rero Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.